Welcome into the Orange and Brown Report streaming network, or the OBR streaming network. My name is Brad Ward. That is the always spectacular Quincy Carrier. You can follow him on Twitter at Quen_C. This is things I think I know about the Cleveland Browns. What is up, Q?
Nothing much, man. Nothing much. Just enjoying free agency. We're getting real close to the draft. And, once we get out of March and we get closer to April, then the draft picture is going to really start materializing and becoming a lot clearer because, we've been dealing with basically guesses, right? Now it's going to start to formulate itself. Who's making what move for what player, who's going to be available to in the conversations that we have been needing to have. I think we're going to start having a little bit more intensely.
Yeah, and start to see who has filled what holes where in free agency, and not every team is as good at filling those holes, and that'll kind of lead to some direction probably in the draft as well. I'm going to play this video for the OBR. OBR is knocking it out of the park with coverage, wall-to-wall coverage, free agency right now, and the draft. So make sure you are over there and locked into that. Let's get this video rolling.
Information comes at you fast from so many angles every single day. You have interests, diversions, a number of distractions. Times have changed. You don't have time for all that pop and flash of Browns trolls, bots, and aggregators. That's why you head to the OBR. Here, it's all Browns, all day, every day. Established in 1999, the OBR is stacked with first-rate reporters who are at practice, in the locker room, talking to sources, breaking down tape, crunching the numbers, at the combine, talking free agency and the draft, all fueled by the most lively forums and Browns fan base anywhere. Yes, the world's gonna throw a lot at you today. Just remember to keep your head in the game. The OBR. Stuff your helmet with better stuff.
Stuff your helmet with better stuff at the OBR. Very cool. Great video there from our marketing team. All right, let's get into the conversation today. A couple topics we want to hit on. First and foremost, Myles Garrett heads to the podium to talk first time since he has decided to extend his career in Cleveland for very awkward, Quincy. Knew this was going to be a little awkward, right? I mean, you can't take back the things that he said. And I thought he did a nice job of not trying to take back the things that he said, which I think people would have kind of taken some offense to. He went out of his way to say no, not out of his way, but he answered, no, I don't regret it. No, you know what I mean? I don't regret saying that stuff. Ultimately, he kind of pointed in a general direction to that it led to more conversation with Andrew Berry and more clarity for him. I don't know if that's actually true, but that seems like the easiest path or reason to point to for him. I still am going to stick to the idea, Q, that he just basically saw the writing on the wall and knew that he wasn't going to get moved and that he was never going to sit out games, and that if he wanted to have good players alongside him, he needed to make sure that free agents knew he was going to be a Cleveland Brown before free agency started. So that probably had to do with the timing of it. There was one quote, Q, that jumped out to me where, although he never said, like, I regret this or that, he did, say at one point that he wished he was a little more level-headed after the season, coming off a disappointing season. That's about as close to any regret that he showed, I thought, in the presser.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult position for Myles to be at because you don't want to look like a fool for asking for a trade, right? And that's kind of how this has been portrayed of him nationally, which like I've never heard of a team signing a top tier, the defensive player of the year to a big contract and get so much criticism for it, right? Like only that happens when Cleveland does it, right? Everything good, Cleveland do it. Oh, Cleveland bad, right? Just fantastic way that this team gets covered sometimes by national press. But yeah, like I think part of it is Myles saw the writing on the wall, like you said, and realized that he wasn't going to be able to force an outcome. And some of this was people talking to him, probably teammates of his, right? We've heard David Njoku say that we're going to talk to him, all this stuff.
Yeah.
And kind of talking him down a bit from where he was when the season ended. I can't blame Myles Garrett for being furious at the end of the season. They were a 3-win team. We thought this team could potentially make a run, right? If things went right. After an 11-win season, winning 3 games, having the second overall pick is just absolutely not where we want it to be. And, you know, it's funny to put it this way, but it's true. Myles had the same reaction a lot of Browns fans had, right, after this season or during the season, right, where, you know, we've heard it from Browns fans. They'll comment on here on the OBR or on my YouTube channel, and they'll be like, hey, I'm done with the Browns. I hate this team, this and that, right, because they're furious with how the season has went, and Myles had a similar reaction with the end of this season, right? Also, I think Jameis Winston brought this up way back in February, which is the scars of going 0-16. He was there, right? That still affects him. So when he sees a team go 3-13, he automatically goes back to, oh my God, we're going to tank again, right? Oh my God, we're going to strip this thing down and rebuild it. So it probably took a lot of constant conversations and reassurances from the front office saying, hey, we're committed to this core. We're not just going to fold it all up because we had one bad season. We're not going to overreact to that. And maybe that built some insurance over time. Also, you know, some of the stuff was just straight up posturing, right? Like all the stuff right before the extension happened where, you know, you're just throwing stuff out there. That's the usual kicking and screaming that you get from an agent before they have to make the deal, right? Like before that has to go down. You know, we're seeing that. We'll see how this Kirk Cousins things plays out, but a similar ordeal is going on in Atlanta. And we've seen ordeals like that before where it's like, oh, Lamar Jackson, he burned bridges, right?
Yeah.
Between Baltimore and Lamar Jackson, and he can't go back. And then like 2 weeks later, a deal gets done. It's like, yeah, you know, you got to use your leverage, and part of using your leverage is a little ugly. I also want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier, right? Yeah. Which is this idea of like Myles requests this trade, and he had to have a lot of conversations with the front office that he says makes him feel better. It reminds me a lot of what happened with the Cavs this offseason. Not saying it's the same exact thing. It's not a one-to-one comp. There's obviously small differences here, but part of when the season ended last year, right, it was a little bit of a disappointment for the Cavs. They expected to be a 55-win team. They were a 48-win team. There was tension between Darius and Donovan Mitchell. And at the end of the season, the report was Darius Garland wanted out if they're going to bring back Donovan Mitchell, right? That was the report. You cannot have these two back. One of them's got to go. That was the talking point for most of the summer. And what Darius says soft, it was, hey, me and Donovan just had to have some real conversations about what's going to have to happen, right? Going forward to get better. And that actually, you know, going through that ugliness cleared things up a little bit, made things a lot easier to move forward with. You know, the Browns are talking about building a career-long relationship with Myles Garrett. And anybody who's been in a long-term relationship with anything and anybody knows that, you know, it gets messy sometimes. It gets a little testy. But
no doubt,
getting through those situations and prospering through that is what makes a relationship strong, right? Like if you don't go through anything, then you don't really have any kind of test there. But with Myles and the Browns, this was definitely a strain on it. We've seen this with Kobe and the Lakers. We've seen this with guys before. They were able to get through it. It seems like Myles from the press conference is pretty like locked into this being a long-term deal, which again, I am surprised by, right? I thought Myles would kind of play this short terms, like, hey, yeah, I'm into the vision right now. We'll see what happens in the future. Kind of do that whole thing LeBron used to do, right? Where he would allude to the future, make sure you know you're still on the hot seat. He was like, nah, like he seemed pretty bought into like, hey, I'm going to be here for the rest of my career, and talk about it like that. Because he's 30 now. This contract takes him another 6 years. He's going to be 36 by the end of this deal. So, whatever conversations they had, and, I think so much of the GM job, and you can tell me what you think about this. Do you feel like we kind of focused a bit too much on, when it comes to the GM job, on stuff like draft picks and like specific free agent signings instead of like worrying about what the actual job entails?
Yeah, like I don't even think it, not very often ever do we talk about like the relationships that a general manager has to foster with his players, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's never about that. It's about draft picks. It's about the moves they make, right? It's about building the roster. Because really, it's not that often that, yes, the negotiations, have to be done in good faith, and there has to be some trust there from both sides. But like on a day-to-day basis, they're not talking to the GM usually. It's only around when your contract's coming due, or you're looking at restructuring or something like that they probably have a lot of conversations with Andrew Berry or any GM. So you wonder, and Myles initially, when he brought this up, he was applauded by the fans for kind of putting the pressure on. If you remember that, right? It was like,
well, because fans felt like Myles did at the time, which is like, because fans were mad at the team for losing as much as they did. They're watching the playoffs. We all know you get more mad at your team during the playoffs when you aren't in it, because you're like, why aren't we in this? Why can't we have these moments like this? Why can't we feel like Detroit fans feel at the first game, right? Like it's all of that stuff kind of combined. And the reason I brought up the whole Andrew Berry thing, right, is I feel like a huge part of what a general manager needs to be able to do is understand where sentiment might be and be able to convince those that you need to convince that it's not going in a direction that you think, right?
Yeah.
Like people talked about this, feels like years ago, right, Brad? But it was just a few months ago. Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, they don't even want to come to Cleveland. Look at that dumpster fire of a situation. If I were them, I would force my way out of Cleveland. I would make sure, like all this silly talk about players who, quite frankly, like aren't good enough to demand that, right? But either way, right, Andrew Berry, once these guys start meeting with them, what do we find out? Oh, Cam Ward, more than okay. He actually wants to come to Cleveland. Shedeur Sanders, more than okay. He actually wants to come to Cleveland, right? After months of conversation with Myles Garrett, it seems like yes, there is the money aspect of this, obviously, but it does feel like there's legitimate buy-in from Myles Garrett here from the contract. Because again, he's not doing that short-term, like, we'll reevaluate this in a couple of years kind of language that you see from players who sign an extension just because they feel like the money was right. Like there's some kind of buy-in to the vision. I don't think it's going to manifest why he bought into the vision this offseason, because they weren't going to do anything this offseason to be able to keep him outside, like getting Matthew Stafford or something like that. But I think there's some kind of buy-in there. And I think that's where Andrew Berry does get some credit here, is we've seen these situations where people have gone into it thinking that Cleveland, that nobody's going to want to come to Cleveland, this and that. But it seems like he's able to go in there and argue for a vision, present that vision. And I think the admirable part about all of this is that, he's not going to fold on that vision, right? there was plenty of opportunity to fold, or, the nightmare scenario for me is like, hey, we get so desperate to keep Myles Garrett that we offer a Godfather deal to like Arizona to get Kyler Murray and put ourselves back in the same situation we were with Deshaun Watson, because we know Kyler Murray, Texas A&M, Myles Garrett's former teammate, that'll get Myles excited to play here. That would be what keeps him. He didn't have to do that, right, to get that buy-in. He was able to just talk to him and do it. And is that sexy? No. Is that going to be leading on ESPN, or is that going to make Stephen A. Smith talk nice about you on First Take or Get Up? No. But these are the real tangible things that if you look around at GMs who are good at their job, they're able to do stuff like this, right? Eric DeCosta, everybody thought the Ravens were going to have to trade for like a giant wide receiver to be able to keep Lamar Jackson. All they had to do was sign Odell Beckham, right? Like that's all they ended up having to do to placate and change the offensive coordinator. This is, as much as I think Andrew Berry deserves some criticism for some of his drafts, right? I think 2021 draft, objectively not good. 2022 draft, objectively not good. You can look at it in a lot of different ways, even if you measure for like what they had. Were not great drafts. And he deserves criticism for that. But if you look at his ability to retain players, the fact that while this Myles thing was going on, players were actively saying he need to come back. No, we got something going, right? Like, come on, man, come on back. That was the sentiment from every veteran on this team. That means something, right? After you go 3-13, 3-14, I mean, the Cavs might finish the whole season with less losses than you, right? That's how bad the season went.
How bad it was,
And for every veteran on that team to be like, nah, it ain't that bad. That says a lot about what's going on there from a structure standpoint. And I do think that being able to, this is a huge win for the Browns. I know some Browns fans are going to try to dice it up as something. Yeah. I saw Jason Lloyd, put some smear out there about Myles when it comes to like his work ethic and stuff like that. And Myles responded accordingly to that campaign from him. But it's this thing here where I keep seeing it's like, hey, people keep expecting the Browns to do the dysfunctional thing. They don't do the dysfunctional thing. And then they get criticized for not doing the dysfunctional thing. I'm having people message me about, what's Myles Garrett worth whatever we paid him? He's Myles Garrett. He's worth it, right? And if the Browns could work around $45 million a year guaranteed for Deshaun Watson, they can work around this contract for Myles Garrett. And Myles Garrett ain't Deshaun Watson, right? You ain't trading him from where he was successful, put him in a new situation. You're just saying, hey, Myles, keep doing that thing that you do at a generational level. So a lot of this conversation about Myles Garrett, I think for whatever reason, people have made an effort to skew it negatively, because they're mad at Myles for not coming to their team, or they're mad at Myles for not going to a sexier team. I think that's a lot of the national outlets. Like, oh, we finally get to pry Myles Garrett away from the Cleveland Browns, put him somewhere that we can market like Buffalo or something like that. And that's not going to happen anymore. So now they're mad at Cleveland for doing what they should have done. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It was kind of, we were on the React and we were watching a video of a national, I think it was Fox Sports, right, or FS1 or whatever, and they were talking about it, and they were all talking like, basically like free Myles, right? Like he was being held high, like we got to get him out of there. We got to get him out of there. He's got to get free, and that was the tone they were taking during the trade request. Like he deserves better than this, and those people are reacting in kind now, like. We spoke that way, but the Browns handled their business and he's back. So it's a weird dynamic nationally. It's like they don't want him to be here. They want, you said, they want the sexy move, right? The NBA move. Yeah.
National media is just reactionary now, right? I think that's been the overwhelming tone shift over the last few years, is that a lot of national media is just reactionary. It's just kind of these knee-jerk reactions that we put a megaphone up to and blast out to everybody. And that has its issues, right? But I think also because it's so reactionary, we're not really thinking it through. Because a lot of people were like, well, Myles deserves better. He deserves to go to a team that's actually trying to win. The Browns have been criticized the last 3 years for moves they made that seemed too aggressive for trying to win for the situation, right?
Yep.
That's been a criticism of the Cleveland Browns, right? Oh, you're making a move for Deshaun Watson, right? Like, on one hand, the Browns are being killed for being too aggressive to try to win, for moving on from Baker Mayfield to Deshaun Watson, which was a very aggressive win now kind of move, and it did not pay off, right?
No.
Blew up in their face. Fine. Everybody got egg on their face. I think that's why Jimmy has been actually made the leap as owner, right? Because that was the final embarrassment for Jimmy Haslam, where he said, you know what? Andrew handles all of it, right? Like, first it was Hugh Jackson, then it was going 0-16, then it was hiring Freddie Kitchens. Like, it's interesting. Since they went 0-16, there's been like a ladder of like things where you're like, no, Jimmy put his finger on that, and then it blows up, and now he's just like, I ain't got nothing to do with none of this anymore.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's been interesting to see that move be portrayed that way, because people are simultaneously making the argument that the Browns have not tried to win enough for Myles Garrett, while the Browns have made millions of win now decisions that they've been criticized for trying to win too fast. So it's it's this interesting balance of like, oh, is it really that we're criticizing what the Browns are doing, or is it that, hey, we got the Browns on the rundown, we got to criticize them, because that's what we do with the Browns. They're a bad team. Let's criticize them. And it kind of happens there. And I'm not saying the Browns aren't worthy of criticism. Obviously they are, but I think everybody deserves their criticism to be, how would I put this? Consistent. Right? Like, if you're going to criticize the Browns for being aggressive here, trying to win now, and you're saying, hey, signing Myles Garrett, it resets the window on when you can rebuild, that's a criticism I don't agree with, but it's fair, right? Okay, if you think the Browns should rebuild, re-signing Myles, not the best move. I think that no matter what you do, having Myles Garrett on your team is the best move, but that's a disagreement. That's fine. I have no problem with that. But when it's this flip-floppy stuff where it's like, oh, well, the Browns free Myles Garrett, that poor soul, the Browns have done nothing to try to make him win. Meanwhile, TJ Watt's sitting out there with less playoff wins than Myles Garrett, and it doesn't look like the Steelers are doing anything to try to make him win. And like, another thing, and we're starting to see a little bit of this, but if anybody needs to be freed, look at Joe Burrow right now in Cincinnati, right? Like, having that superstar year, winning 9 games or whatever they did, won 9 or 10 games, missed the playoffs. They're the one team that beat Kansas City in the AFC since Tom Brady did it in New England.
Yep.
And they're the least aggressive team to try to get back into that spot to beat Kansas City, right? Like, but the Browns get criticized because they do bring back somebody. Meanwhile, Cincinnati has the quarterback, has all the stuff that we want.
Everything.
Yeah, but they're not doing the little stuff, right? They're letting their Myles Garrett walk, which is crazy to me, right? So I don't mind it. I think in the long run, it's a good decision. I think Myles Garrett re-signing is obviously a good decision. It's just blown my mind how people, like, you could be down on the Browns, but you're not going to convince me that signing Myles Garrett is a bad thing, because that's the greatest player we've had on this franchise since probably Jim Brown. You're not going to tell me retaining that dude's a bad thing. People are treating this like we re-signed Jed Wills, and it don't make any sense to me. Or like we signed Nick Chubb to a giant contract after coming off an ACL injury or something like that, right? Like, it's like, this is not unsure. This is Myles Garrett. Y'all would have been thrilled if he signed this contract literally anywhere else.
Yeah. He has, you're absolutely right. They have, there's a lot of spin going on, for the people that just have to be negative about the Browns, right? And so they're trying to turn this into a negative because they handled it, pretty much perfectly. Me and you talked about the test that AB was up against here this offseason, and so far he passed with flying colors as far as the Myles Garrett situation. This question was interesting here. I'm just going to read this one part of it today. So, Jimmy not taking the meeting with you, was there a connection between that and the fact that this happened so soon after that? I mean, was that them showing you that, we're locking arms here and we want to keep you here, we're absolutely not trading you? Or was there no connection between that and the end result. Myles' answer was, I mean, I'm going to say that just the conversation opened up for me and AB to talk more. Jimmy took a bit of a back seat, leaning on AB and our relationship. I think that's for the better. You want to have a good relationship with your owner as well as your GM. And him and I have had many discussions and conversations over the years, and he helped me see what the future can really hold for us. So, interesting that the whole Haslam thing, which was brought up right before, 2 days before he signed the contract, and it, he is saying that pointed him back to more conversation with Andrew Berea, which ultimately ended in him signing the contract. Do we know if that's ultimately the truth? I don't know. I'll take, it's hard to take Myles at his word at this point, but either way, Andrew Berea was able to paint a picture to Myles that created a sense of urgency that got him to sign the contract before free agency started and understand that he wasn't going to get moved. And ultimately, it never got as ugly as many people projected it to be.
Yeah, I think AB probably just did a good job of laying out what the roadmap is here. Also, I wonder if that's when the no trade clause got thrown into the deal, because that's been the most under talked about element of this contract, is that there is a no trade clause. And I've seen people even talk about it as if the no trade clause is for the Browns. I'm like, no, that's for Myles Garret, right? That's so he can say no to if he did state he wants to go to a contender, so that, hey, if you do trade me, you can't just trade me anyway, right? And he has some leverage.
Gives him power if he comes back to the table with the same request in 2 years. It gives him more leverage, right?
Yeah, and he's like, I'm older. Y'all still ain't got the quarterback. If the window is what the window is, it seems a lot more reasonable. Plus, he has that control there.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that's when the conversation opened up to include a no trade clause. Maybe Myles Garret is a watcher of the LBR or my YouTube channel, but because we've been talking about it for weeks, so it probably makes sense to end this with that. But yeah, I think that was there. And he laid it out. He was like, hey, probably. There was nothing we were going to do this offseason that was going to convince you, right? Yeah. I don't think Kenny Pickett was a move to convince him here, right? But, get this thing a couple years. We trust where we're going to be, and we're going to get this thing back to winning. It was just one season, one down year. Overall, the Browns have been much better with Andrew and Kevin Stefanski at the helm than before, significantly better. So, it just kind of laid out the options. It made sense to Myles. It made sense to his agent, and they made the move to go ahead and sign the deal. That doesn't mean that Myles Garret is going to become Joe Thomas now and he's going to be locked in here forever. But it does mean that you get time, right, to be able to make your move here. And if Andrew Berea, again, this is why I said this offseason is going to be the test of Andrew Berea to figure out, is this the dude that needs to be the GM for the next, he's a young guy, right? So we're talking about 10, 20, 15, 30 years possibly of Andrew Berea as the GM. If he wants to prove that he's that guy, this is the offseason to do it, right? You got to keep Myles Garret on the roster. You have to navigate this offseason where it looks like there's no good option at quarterback and figure out how to get by for a year if you want to get to next year to get your long-term answer, or how to squeeze some kind of answer out of this year. You're going to have to get creative, right? Because I don't think it's simple. It's you could just take a guy at 2, right? It's not one of those years where it's simple. I would have, and Brad, I wish it was. Right?
I wish it was too.
I wish it was, right?
I wish it was too.
Andrew wish it was, right? Everybody, if the Browns pass on a quarterback at 2, I would feel pretty confident in their evaluation of it. Not because I trust the Browns evaluation, but I'm nobody wants that to be the answer more than Cleveland. Right. If they say no to it, that means that they saw enough to where they're I just can't do it. Right. Because we want it desperate. To be easy. Yeah.
They want it to be a yes.
That's the easy button, right? If Jaden Daniels were in this draft, you could take him with the number 2 overall pick or trade up the number 1 to get him. That is the easy button. We got lucky. There's a guy there, a quarterback. Unfortunately, I don't feel like that's the year. This is the year where you can hit the easy button. This seems like a down year for quarterbacks. And it just is what it is there, right? You got to navigate that and figure out how you're going to work out this one. You're going to have to get creative, and you're going to have to do shit that people aren't going to think is good, right? To be fair, we criticized the hell out that Russell Wilson move for Pittsburgh, ended up, being fine for them, right? You're gonna have to make unpopular moves at the court. Nothing you do for the rest of like the offseason at quarterback's gonna make people go, oh yeah, I'm excited about that, right? If you draft Cam Ward, there are gonna be a lot of detractors to that decision. If you draft Shedeur Sanders, there are gonna be a lot of detractors to that decision. If you sign Kirk Cousins, there are gonna be a lot of detractors to that decision. If you sign if you sign Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson, there's gonna be a ton of detractors to that conversation. So yeah, we're trying to live in a world where like the Browns could do something and nobody's going to be critical of it, but that just isn't where we're at, right? Everything they can do at quarterback is incredibly polarizing. So it is what it is. You just got to get through it.
It is. So that's what I want to talk about next with you, Q, is basically everything that is going on with the quarterback room. So let's start with this question. As the landscape, we know what's happened so far. Daniel Jones is off the table to the Colts, who I really didn't even have on the board as a team to come get a guy when we were laying out the teams and kind of, this musical chairs of veteran quarterbacks when the music stops and where they're all going to end up. I didn't have the Colts as one of the ones that would be in play for Daniel Jones. So that is kind of unfortunate. You've got Aaron Rodgers really dragging his feet with this Pittsburgh connection that's been made. Now there's rumors of him talking to Minnesota, which is his own weird story there of why they wouldn't just go on to JJ. But the main thing is this. So Monday will be the $10 million bonus for Cousins. Do you believe Atlanta in that they will pay the $10 million, which is actually the $10 million in 2026, and that they'll pay the $10 million that they can save by cutting him, and then leave him on the roster at his very large contract, which they'll have to pay either way, but it's the $10 million that they can save by cutting him before Monday. $10 million is a lot, in cap space. I mean, that's a couple players, depending on how you structure it. Do you think they're bluffing at this point, or do you think they intend to keep him as the backup to Penix?
I think there is a chance that they're bluffing. I think there's a strong chance that they're bluffing. I also think that they try to call this, right? If we're going to continue to use poker things where it's like, hey, we're going to get Kirk to restructure this deal for the time being so we don't have to worry about that $10 million bonus. And then we can stretch this thing out until June, right? Where if you cut him, you can split up the rest of his dead money over 2 years. That would pretty much kill a trade market, but it would make it like if the Falcons have to cut Kirk Cousins, that would be the optimal way to cut Kirk Cousins. Yeah. So if that's how they had to go about it, I think that's how they would prefer to go about it. So maybe this thing stretches out until June.
Ugh.
I don't know if the Browns are going to be willing to wait that long, right? Like they've already had Russ in the building, whether that was smoke or not.
Yeah, do you think that was a lever? Do you think having Russ in was a real option for the Browns, or do you think that was a message to Atlanta that, hey, we will look at other guys. We're not going to sit around here and wait forever?
It's a little bit of both. Right. Like, I think it's not a mistake that this thing was public. Right. Like not every visit the Browns have with free agents is public, to the point to where there's paparazzi in the bushes taking pictures of him walking and leaving out. That part of it feels very theatrical to me. So, it feels like they wanted people to know that Russ was going to be in the building. But also, I think there's part of this, and they kind of made it seem like, too, that, and if this is this is theatrics, right? By the Browns front office, and like kudos, right? Because it kind of made it seem like he met with Myles Garrett, like the way that they were like, "Oh, Myles is in the building for the first time today," and then Russ is meeting, right? And then Deshaun Watson, right? Like it's like,
strange.
Are they more serious about this than not? Right?
Yeah,
It's very strange how this one came out about.
Sure.
But also it's Russ. So some stuff's just kind of strange around Russ sometimes. You just got to like live with it. But yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. The Browns got to have somebody start. And I don't think Kenny Pickett is the guy that you can just, I don't think you could just say, hey, man, we're going to have Kenny Pickett. And let's say you draft somebody in the third round, Jalen Milroe, Will Howard, battle it out. And that's going to be your quarterback room for a year for a team that's in a position to compete a little bit, right? Like if this were 2021 Houston Texans and you just want to, see what you got and roll into the draft next year, fine. But I don't know. I think they want to win some games this year. They want to be competitive this year. So,
kind of have to, in my opinion, if they want to keep their jobs.
Yeah, and if you want to stay competitive, and I don't know what their job security is like, the longer and longer free agency goes on, the more I'm like, I feel like they're way more secure than like having a couple bad seasons would take them out. But conventional wisdom tells me you can't have 2 back-to-back bad seasons, right? When you haven't won like a Super Bowl or anything in there. But Jimmy is taking a huge back seat right now, right? And that's not stuff you do when you're thinking about firing a guy in like 8 months, right?
Right. I get what you're saying, especially because AB is being so deliberate and patient in free agency in the trade market, right? And which he should be, and that's how you should be handling this. Because you don't build a winner in free agency. You just add here and there and fill a couple holes, and that's it. So and that's kind of what they've done so far. The big question is just around this quarterback situation. All right. So Russ, so a little bit of both makes sense, right? What do you do if Atlanta does hold up and say and follow through on their word, and they're not bluffing and they're not going to let Cousins out? You can't trade for him. It's too cost prohibitive. You can't take on that contract in any way, shape, or form. Now you're looking at Russ and your secondary options out there like Winston and Flacco and guys like that. Like, what are you doing? Are you trying to push in on Russ Wilson to really do this for the Browns?
If Kirk ain't there, Russ is the best possible option available to you, right? And it's so interesting how people have talked about these quarterback options this year. Because, like, I've heard such condemnation of the idea of Russell Wilson or Kirk Cousins here. And it's like, maybe if you feel like we're trying to win a championship this year, obviously, I don't think Kirk Cousins and Russell Wilson are going to bring you even close to that. But if you're just trying to win some games this year, then I think Kirk has demonstrated that he can still win games. They won games in Atlanta, right, with him at quarterback last year. Russ could demonstrate that you win games. They won games with Russ as a quarterback last year, right? Like that. You can do this as long as you have those guys around him. If you can't get Kirk, then I think you do focus. That's why they do bring in Russ, because you don't want to be left, with nobody to dance with when the lights come on, or, whatever the analogy is. So you got to go ahead and grab Russell Wilson or something like that. Try to beat out the Giants to it. If you can't get Russ, then it does make you have to think about, hey, do you have to change your strategy from maybe a quarterback in the third round to a quarterback in the second round? If Shedeur Sanders falls, are you going to be a bit more aggressive there? I would think so, right? Because if he falls past like Pittsburgh at 20, which I think a lot of people feel like is unlikely, but there's always one unlikely draft guy who falls. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. And I have not, like, Shedeur Sanders just smells like the guy they're going to have fall. Like, they're trying to tell you right now, they're going to have this dude fall. So if Shedeur does fall further than expected, I think if you're the Browns, you want to jump in there at 26, 27, take him. Makes a ton of sense here, right? So they're going to have to figure out their options. It might just be one of those years where it's like, it's just not going to be great, right? It's going to be Joe Flacco. It's going to be Kenny Pickett. We're going to try to run this ball, be competitive. We all kind of understand what year we're going to have. The expectations aren't going to be super high. But because the expectations are super high, if you get any level of success, you're probably going to be much happier with it than you were this year, which might prevent everybody from being fired. Because the big frustration last year, why we thought everybody was going to get fired, the expectations were here. The win-loss record was here.
Yeah, exactly.
The expectations are not going to be here next year.
No.
The expectations are about right here. Like, hey, man, if we go 9-8, I think we're going to be happy
for sure
with whatever we get out this season. So it's like when the expectations are here, if you win 6 games, I don't think anybody's getting fired. So, it just comes down. I think we're coming down from, hey, man, we've had 3 years of hoping this team could make that leap and become a Super Bowl contender to, all right, well, we need to figure out a new plan at quarterback. And that might take a year or two, right?
Yeah.
And I'd rather them take the swing that they feel good about, right? Swing at the pitch that you think you can hit instead of trying to just throw your bat at a curveball you can't slice, right? If we could we found all 3 sports analogies in here, Brad. We're rocking.
I love it.
Right? Baseball, football, basketball,
all of
but yeah. If I want this team to take a swing at a pitch they think they can hit and not try to slice at a curveball because they want to be the team that slices at a curve. They want to be the guy that hits the curveball, right? Like that kind of feels like where we're at. Hit the pitch you can hit. Have a smart at bat this offseason at quarterback. And, it might be one of them years where you just got to walk, take first base and see if you can steal the second. Maybe you get stranded on base is what it is. Right.
Yeah.
But you rather do that to strike out.
100%. If they go, in the draft, you expect them, last question here on this, you expect them to take that swing in the 3rd round, 4th round right now? Like if they were to get Cousins or Russ or one of these better options that are left, right? It's hard to say better options, but the best ones left, then where do you expect them to take that swing? Like the 3rd or 4th round?
I wonder, because we're just assuming they take a swing, right? Because they need to, or at least people feel like they need to.
Yeah.
I really do wonder how much they feel like they need to take a swing on this class. Like if they don't really believe in it. And I would argue trading for a 5th round pick for Kenny Pickett, given that Kenny Pickett was a quarterback prospect you were not excited about taking, right? No. The prospect of taking in 2022 up to the point where you didn't swing on Deshaun Watson, right? When you were faced with no Baker Mayfield or 2022 draft, you were like, we'll take Deshaun Watson, right?
Yeah.
So, and Jacoby Brissett. So I don't think they're very excited about the back end of this quarterback class. And I wonder, like, maybe they like Milroe a little bit, right? If he makes sense in a certain spot in the 3rd round. Maybe they like, somebody like Howard or Dart at the right spot. The Browns are not a team that tends to panic, right? Or they tend to stick with their board.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it comes to a point to where it's 3rd round, like if somebody overdrafts Jackson Dart, if Shador Sanders gets drafted in the top 10, if Jalen Milroe gets drafted super early in the 2nd, if they say to themselves, okay, we're just out, right?
Yeah.
Like, why take a quarterback just to take a quarterback? And it's going to infuriate Browns fans for sure, but
it will.
It might end up being the right decision because if you feel like none of these guys would be worth a pick, then
you feel like
why
you have
take
to
the
reach
pick
to get one? Yeah.
Yeah, if you can especially use that pick to get somebody you think could be productive for you at a different position, I see that. So I think they want to protect themselves from being in that situation. The problem is if you have Joe Flacco there and you have Kenny Pickett, you kind of got to use one of your 3 first picks on a quarterback.
Another guy.
Because you got to feel good about whatever you're doing, right? That might be like, hey, we got to take Jalen Milroe here, or we got to take this guy or that guy here. So, I think they would like to avoid being in that situation.
Yeah.
And I think getting Kirk, getting Russ does prevent you from having to
feeling like you have to draft a guy
to get a quarterback. Yeah. Like if you like a quarterback at a spot, I don't think it stops you from taking a guy at a spot, right? But it does stop you from having to reach.
Yep. Totally agree. Yeah, I mean, if it's Winston and Pickett or Flacco and Pickett or whoever and Pickett, you do feel like you have to get a guy. And when you're in any position in the draft where you feel like you have to do something, you may end up reaching and they want to avoid that completely. It makes a ton of sense. But if they get Russ or they get Kirk, even though they aren't the greatest options in the world, it does put them in a position where they don't have to do anything.
We got to come up with a name for what Russ and Kirk are, because like they're not bad, they're not good. It's like it is. They are the compromise pick, right? All right, it's not going to implode, right?
Yeah.
Like,
trust the offense pick. Yeah. Like, you got everything's got to be perfect around him too. Which leads to even more conversation and more answers to be asked and discussed as we go through the offseason here.
It's a question of too, where are your expectations with whatever you could do with these guys, right? Like because right now it feels like people are reacting to these options as if the Browns have championship aspirations, or at least that's how the reaction comes off. I don't think people legitimately have that with this year's team, but everybody's at a place where like, hey, we go 9-8, we'd be fine. Both these guys went above 9-8 last year with teams that we don't think roster-wise are much better than the Cleveland Browns.
Sure.
Like, so this thought process of like, we're dreading Kirk Cousins, we're dreading Russell Wilson. It's like, I wouldn't be excited about it. I wouldn't be crowning somebody a great GM because of the move.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to be that critical of it. It's kind of just...
It's the only thing out there. Yeah.
What's a solid... It's a ramen noodle, right? Like, it's ramen noodles. It's like, hey, man, you ain't eating the lunch you want to eat, but you're definitely eating something, right? And let's face it, ramen noodles ain't bad. Like, like...
You'll get full if you eat enough of them.
Yeah, it's not like you're eating like something crazy. It's like, now you can put some chicken in there. You can do it up, right? Make it a little nice. Put some seaweed wrap in there, put an egg in there, really, really make it nice. But, at the end of the day, it's ramen noodles. You're not about to win no awards for having no ramen noodles. And the same way, you ain't about to go broke eating ramen noodles. You definitely ain't going to go hungry eating ramen noodles. Yeah. That's what it is. We're going to call it, they are the ramen noodle
quarterbacks.
Yeah, you could choose between whichever brand you like, right? Marchon or the other one. I don't know what other.
Teriyaki chicken.
Yeah, whatever brand of ramen noodles you get. But that's what they are. And it's like, I'm not going to get mad about eating ramen noodles, but it is what it is, right? Like, that's what the Browns are. The Browns are a single dad after a divorce, having to eat ramen noodles in a one-bedroom apartment for a year or two. Like, you're going to build back up, though, bro. Like, you're going to be all right.
Hang in there. Hang in there. You'll get a nice steak dinner here in a couple of years.
It gets better.
Better. Absolutely right. All right. Great stuff as always, Q. Any parting words before we get out of here tonight?
As I always say, you're never as good as you think you are in the NFL. You're never as bad as you think you are in the NFL. So always keep an even mind with it, right? Whatever decision the Browns are going to make, people are going to overreact one way or the other to it, right? Whether it be positive or negative. And this doesn't mean that, if you're excited about something, you should dampen down your enthusiasm. But always keep in the back of your mind, like, hey, I'm excited about this move. I hope it works out. But, the NFL, nothing's guaranteed, right? So, I wouldn't cash any bets about anything, right? So just keep an open mind to things. This has been an exercise. Look, I hate Kenny Pickett as a prospect. I've been vocally opposed to like Kirk Cousins on a championship contending team. So, this offseason has required me to put my ego aside and what I evaluate. Sometimes somebody has a different evaluation of you, and it doesn't mean you didn't do the work. It means, just they got a different view on it, and maybe their vision works. Try to put your ego aside, try to see the vision with what the Browns are going to do. And remember, you're never as bad as you think you are. So I know Browns fans think we're going to go 0-16 this year or something like that. You're not that bad. And just like, hey, we weren't as good as we thought we were after we went 11-6 with 4 different quarterbacks. We thought we were impenetrable. So, keep that in mind. You're always the Kansas City. Probably didn't think they were going to get smoked in the Super Bowl, right?
No.
You're never as good as you think you are. Philadelphia lost to Baker Mayfield in the playoffs last year. You're never as bad as you think you are, though, right?
That's
Always
wild.
keep that in
I totally
mind.
forgot about that. Yeah, that's crazy to think about.
They got
1 year later.
smacked. Yeah,
Yeah,
they got
they
smacked
did.
by them, right? Like
They
dominated.
did.
Looked
Yeah,
like
they
they
were-
wanted to go to Bahamas the whole
They were in
last month of the season.
shambles at the end of that season. Yeah.
People are talking about the Eagles firing Nick Sirianni if he lost to the Browns this year.
Yep.
You're never as
Yeah.
good as you think you are, never as bad.
Well said. As always, Quincy Carrier, fantastic. Follow him on Twitter at Quinn_C. My name is Brad Ward. This has been another edition of Things I Think I Know About the Browns. Keep it locked at the OBR. Hit like and subscribe on your way in or out. And keep it locked to this channel all week for Q. My name is Brad. Have a wonderful evening. We are out.